Hey, friends, welcome back to the Invitation Podcast. Kyle here,
Phil here.
and we're jumping into Season 3, Episode 6, which we're titling Rahab's Redemption. And that's jumping into Joshua 2. So, this is a section of the Bible that maybe you didn't spend a lot of time in, but I think you'll find there's some really cool nuggets here. We're going to dive into it. But before we do, as always, let's back it up and get a little recap from Phil on episode 5, which was all about what we called here and the Shema. Tell us more about that and bring us up to speed.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. It's always good to take a step back just to grasp the context a little bit. And in the last episode, we titled it Here, Hear, because the Hebrew word Shema means here. And the prayer that it's referencing starts, Hear, O Israel. And so we did a deep dive on how that prayer is prayed twice a day by Jewish people for millennia and all the way up through present day. And not only does it serve as a prayer, but also serves as a prophecy that foretells the coming sacrifice of Jesus. And so should our lives as a result, if we're going to pray that way and understand its context that way. And so going forward, we're going to try and pick at least one passage out of each one of the coming books of the Bible to make invitations and to search for what God is speaking to us even to this day. And for the book of Joshua, we're going to look at the story of Rahab. Now, Joshua, to give a little context to the whole of the book first, it's a tricky book for a lot of people. Not everyone per se, but some people really struggle with what is often referred to as the conquests of Israel as they terrorize and militarize the nations around the Jordan River and around the Promised Land and destroy them. And I think there will be a day where we come back and visit some tough questions of the Bible, some tough invitations. I think that'll be down the road. But I picked out this Rahab story, not because it's easier, although it is, although there's some really juicy details we'll cover too that are difficult. So this isn't an easy story, but it is easier than those big questions of conquest. I picked this out because I think it lends to the larger narrative that we keep eating at, right? That, all the time we spent in Genesis 1, 2, and 3, all the way back in season 1 to sort of set up the big story of the Bible. Where is all this going? I really like some of the points that fit into that bigger story here. So with that, Kyle, would you like to read we're going to break Joshua chapter 2 into 4 sections today. Would you like to read the first section, which will be verses 1 through 7?
Let's kick it off. This is coming at you from the NIV, Joshua chapter 2, starting in verse 1, going through 7. Then Joshua, son of Nun, that's capital N-U-N, not son of none like zero, son of Nun, secretly sent 2 spies from Shittim. Go look over the land, he said, especially Jericho. So they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. The king of Jericho was told, look, some of the Israelites have come here tonight to spy out the land. So the king of Jericho sent this message to Rahab. Bring out the men who came to you and entered your house, because they have come to spy out the whole land. But the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. She said, yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they had come from. At dusk, when it was time to close the city gate, they left. I don't know which way they went. Go after them quickly. You may catch up with them. But she had taken them up to the roof and hidden them under the stalks of flax she had laid out on the roof. So the men set out in pursuit of the spies on the road that leads to the fords of the Jordan. And as soon as the pursuers had gone, the gate was shut.
Okay, right off the top here, I mean, Israel sends out 2 spies, and where do they end up of all places but a prostitute's house? So I I don't know. Yeah, shame on them. I don't know how much we're supposed to read in between the lines here. Like, were they distracted, or was this just the easiest way into the city? I don't know, right? I don't have a hard opinion on that. It's definitely an eyebrow raiser.
Sure, sure, right? Because on one hand, it's like, and then on the other hand, it's like, well, God throughout the entire book has used the most unqualified folks to do great works. So, in one sense, it's kind of on par. On the other, it's still unconventional.
Yeah, especially I mean, I only went back to Deuteronomy, right? That's where we heard the Shema. But you go back just two books earlier, and we had a whole book of laws about adultery in Leviticus. Like there's all sorts of strictness about this, and so yeah, it's at the very least an eyebrow raiser, and at the very most, it's like a what are you doing? Like you would even get into the city, and you're already messing around with a prostitute. Like
Right,
what is
right.
happening here?
And even just on the surface, right? So, let me get this straight. You went out to spy and you were hiding in the house of a prostitute. Yeah, totally checks out.
You might be wondering too, how did the city guards like figure this out right away? And I I actually don't know. I was looking over notes while you were reading, and I think this comes about later in the chapter, but it was common for there to be housing within the walls of the city themselves,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
especially right near the gate. The city gate for ancient cities were often like town squares. It was kind of this hub where you would find the most common utilizations of a town, right? Like you
Sure.
you could pay bills there, you could go to the market there, you could,
Don't talk about
you know,
Rahab like that. So it's
yeah,
interesting because when you think about it, it makes sense. You're going to have all this stone that's very labor intensive to get there. So if you're going to put it up into a wall, you might as well create some housing while you're at it. So it makes sense from an architectural standpoint.
mhm,
And then if you're just going to put people there, yeah, it's going to become the hub. Makes sense.
that's right. Whenever there were wars and they were coming to your city, like it was all hands on deck. So even the people living in the walls would start throwing stuff and dumping stuff. I mean, like, or the military would make use of their housing in the walls. So
Sure.
yeah, very multifaceted. It was intelligent, right? Like it was
Mhm.
making them. You were getting right at this. It was making the most of the
Right.
design.
Right.
But of
Well, it doesn't
course,
say it,
Rahab.
but like these guys didn't have any TV, so they were watching who was coming and going,
Exactly.
right?
And if people are coming from out of town on long journeys, I don't want to get too much into like the sex education part of this, but like it might be common for travelers to go to the prostitute's house first.
You never know.
All that to say, so we can ask all the questions that we want to do about that. And I think we should to a certain degree because right away, we're not told of any sexual deviance. We're told of the prostitute behaving well beyond our expectations. And instead of outing these foreign spies, which she could have every right to, and in fact, it wouldn't surprise me if the guards utilized her and her services that way for the
Mhm.
benefit of the city. And that's probably why the guards knew, knew to look, right? Or knew
Right.
to
And there
observe
was
that part of it.
upside too, probably if Rahab says, "Oh yeah, you know, here they are." She's, you know, fighting for the home team and
Mhm,
ratting these guys out. She's probably going to get rewarded. Hey, look, she turned these guys in. Look, she's saving the city. So
mhm.
there was definitely more upside. I think you get into that later, but she took action in a way that put herself in potential danger when she certainly didn't have to.
That's right. Yeah, and we'll do a deeper dive into that later. Here at the beginning of this story, I wanted to highlight this. So, the book of Genesis itself kind of serves as an introduction to the whole rest of the Old Testament, the whole rest of the Bible. And the plot of that book largely begins to take a twist when the crafty voice of the serpent is listened to by the woman,
Mm,
and the man was there with her, and we covered that all the way back in season one. But then Exodus, the next four books of the Bible, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, really just covers the story of Moses, right? Moses and the Israelites. And that story begins with women acting with craftiness to
Mhm.
spare Moses. So it kind of takes this like craftiness and turns it on its head a little bit. And instead of the woman obeying the crafty voice, the women are the crafty voice, but it's redeeming the people.
Mm.
It's redeeming Moses. And so now here we're in the book of Joshua, which is another point, right? Another distinct beginning of Israel's story. And we're only in the second chapter. And now instead of, the image bearer of God being tempted and listening to the crafty voice of the serpent, and instead of the women of God, the female Israelites, being the crafty voice, now we've got a non-Israelite woman prostitute being crafty and showing great faith. And so really the first question we want to dig into here, Kyle, are there any examples where faith has taken on the form of craftiness, whether in your own life, if you want to tell a story of you being crafty in a faithful way, or in a way that you can think that you've observed, or maybe in a movie or something like that. Are there any times where like craftiness actually was faithfulness?
Yeah, so I think I always like to go back to the definition. And so when you look at what Merriam-Webster has to say about crafty, the first definition is skillful and clever, right?
Yeah.
So in that sense, yeah, I think that when you look at apologetics and when you look at always being prepared to give an answer about your own faith, I think that there's a certain amount of not only skill and preparation, but also cleverness in the sense of understanding your audience and understanding where they're coming from. And I think uh, I like to really tread lightly here, because then you look at other definitions too. The two that was definition one in Merriam-Webster, and then definition 2A is adept in the use of subtlety and cunning.
Hmm.
And the two examples there are not great. A crafty swindler, a crafty detective. Well,
Hmm.
actually, no. Here, this is actually good. The crafty detective got the suspect to confess to the crime.
Hmm.
Okay, interesting. And then B is marked by subtlety and guile. So when you dive into that, there's many ways to take it. This certainly is, I would say, more gray than black and white, but I would go back to that first definition of really knowing yourself, knowing your story, understanding why you believe what you believe, and having the skill to articulate, even under scrutiny, why you believe what you believe. And then being able to explain that to someone with potentially very different life experiences than you, um, so that you're able to come together on common ground, right? Um, yeah, that's probably enough on that one.
Yeah, that's great. I really appreciate the honing in on the skill of being crafty and how that goes hand in hand, but also how craftiness is a double-edged sword. It can
Sure.
swing good and it can
Yeah, look at
swing
it in the
bad.
courtroom, right? Like there's
Hmm.
someone that's, defending the innocent, and there's someone that's defending the guilty party.
Yeah. And I'm realizing we spent some time with Abraham, but we didn't spend any time with Isaac and Jacob. And Jacob was known as being crafty, and it gets him into
Mhm.
trouble, but it also like sustains him. And so that, if you want to go back on your own and look through Jacob's story, there's a good 5, 6 chapters just on Jacob at
Mhm.
least. I think where my mind went was so part of my role in my job is to train and build up campus ministers, right, and like encourage them. And so I had about 5 or 6 new staff that I was still doing some training stuff with, and I walked them onto the campus downtown that I went to as a student, and that I served on as a campus minister and where you and I met, right? So I walked them there, and what I did was I gave them these like scenarios, but we did it in a walking way. It was this beautiful day, and so I was like, okay, like let's say you're hanging out at this dorm and you encounter this freshman, and he's been faithful, or he or she's been faithful right through their high school years, but they're not sure if they want to, and so I gave them scenarios like, how would you respond to that student? And then we walked over to the cub and we're like, okay, like that student's a sophomore now, and they're trapped in this like dating cycle, dating and breaking up, dating, and then junior year, right? Like we kept walking, and that same student, they're this now, and at the end of it, I was like, how do you feel about the work that you've done with this student? And so they're reflecting on it, and they're like, I really like this person's answer over there. I wish I would have answered that way, or I really would have done this differently now that I see the whole picture. And I was like, what if I told you that student was your boss? And it dawned on them that I was using my own story, right? And so not only was I teaching them certain campus ministry aspects of like how to engage with students, I was also trying to lend them hope, because my story did not look like someone that would become
Hmm.
a campus minister, let alone someone that would supervise campus ministers at the beginning of their freshman year, right? Like it was just this person that wanted to throw away their faith, wanted to explore the party scene, wanted to turn away from God, and instead they're talking to that exact freshman just 15 years later or whatever it was, right? And so
Wow.
there is a skill, there's a craftiness, not to pat myself on the back, but there's like a skill to saying like, I want to kind of pull the wool over their eyes a little bit, and then pull it back, and let them get a little bit more than what they would have bargained for had I just said, you should reach out to freshmen, or you should
Right.
you should be
Or even, hey, here's
compassionate.
my story.
Exactly,
So
right?
listen
If
to
I could
me
have done
because I'm your
one
boss.
or the other, right?
Right.
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So yeah, I mean, I think the invitation here is to not shy away from cunning or skill or craft or storytelling or these things. There's room for it in faith, and in Jewish terms, there's a term called chutzpah, where you have this like it's a bold cunningness. So not only is it this craftiness, but you're being like out there with it and bold with it and demanding with it even.
Well, and I like that in the sense that eh, I was I bought the lie that in order to become a Christian, I needed to deny my own unique self and become. I just had this idea in my head of what a Christian was
Sure, a
supposed to
priest
be, and you
or
do your
hmm
box, and here, this is just what you are, and this is what you listen to, and this is what you talk about, and this is, you were giving up that individuality, and I think part of what this speaks to is allowing your unique personality and mental skill set that was given to you by a good creator that gives wonderful gifts in order to match up into the world and create some pretty beautiful things.
well, I feel like we could camp here forever, but like the Israelites, we gotta move on from our camp and keep going deeper into this story. So let's Kyle, if you don't mind reading verses 8 through 13.
I don't mind at all. Let's dive into it, starting in chapter 8. Before the spies lay down for the night, she went up on the roof and she said to them, I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the two kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. When we heard of it, our hearts melted in fear, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my family, because I've shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you'll spare the lives of my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and that you will save us from death.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Kyle. So, what I love about this passage is she summarizes the whole story of the Exodus and the conquering of Egypt, and even gives us a little bit more of the story of what God has been like for the Israelites. And where we've left off in this story is that the Israelites haven't done a great job of believing in Yahweh's strength and in
Mm,
Yahweh's promises. And now you have this Jericho prostitute that not only like has already redeemed and rescued two Israelite men, so she's already kind of playing a divine godlike figure, but now she is telling their history to them and believing it. She's like,
yeah,
everybody else is scared. Their hearts are melting. Like
right.
they are trembling. They're shaking their knees in the streets.
If
It's the
I want to
buzz of the
go into a
town.
fight with someone, I want to hear that their hearts are melting in fear. So that
Hmm.
she's got the belief.
Yeah, right. Coming from the boxer out of the two of us. And so I think it's just amazing that the story of God's people is coming from the mouth of the person that we absolutely least would expect it to. But not only that, she appears as someone who is trusting in God's deliverance for God's people, even though it's not her people. She's trusting in it to the point that she's not showing fear. She's showing this chutzpah, this craftiness, right? This cunning. She's willing to risk her own life about it, right? We already saw that in the previous part of the podcast, the previous part of the scripture here. And she's not doing it for herself. She wants her family to be saved, right? So it's
Right.
not just like selfishness,
Right.
but it's I want to make sure that my family is safe and my family is saved. And when I thought about this, when I thought about, wow, like Rahab is doing this with such a heart for God and a heart like God and doing it for her family, I was reminded that all the way, we're doing a flash forward that we don't normally do, but all the way in Matthew 1, okay, so the very beginning of the Gospels, right? So when you go to the New Testament and you first start reading the story about Jesus, you get a genealogy, which normally is boring. And it's kind of uncouth to read genealogies on a podcast, but here I go. Are you ready for this, Kyle? Genesis, of course. Matthew 1:1 says, "This is the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers, Judah the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar, Perez the father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Ram, Ram the father of Amminadab, Amminadab the father of Nahshon, Nahshon the father of Salmon, Salmon the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab, Boaz the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth, Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of King David." I believe since since Rahab honored God with wanting to save her family, that God included her in his
Mm,
own family because she was willing to be Jesus-ish, right? Like Jesus-esque and laying down her own life for the sake of her family, just like Jesus is going to do for his family. I think God honored her with this place to be even the great 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 grandmother. I don't know if I got that right, but the great 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 grandmother of King David himself as
wow.
well, right?
Yeah.
And so I just think it's really, really wonderful that Rahab gets mentioned in this genealogy. She's not an Israelite. We don't, I don't think we really know this until this point too. So it's kind of this also like it's this crafty way of telling us this about Rahab
Right.
as well by God. And I think that even honors her a little bit. It's really inspirational to me. And I hope it's coming across as inspirational to you, the listener, and hopefully to you as well, Kyle. Any thoughts there before we go to the next section?
I think the only thing that stands out to me that I think is worth noting is
Mhm.
here's this woman that has a very clear picture of the Lord's power and what it looks like to have him behind an entire people. And she sees it better than these guys that are living it. And I think what that points out to me is the fact that we can get too close to the goodness that we have right in front of us and we miss it. right? And we can see everyone else's situation so clearly. But it's just a beautiful, it's another example of why we need to have others show us um, our blind spots and to remind us of how good we have it, to remind us of our purpose, to give us, as a mentor of mine for a long time would say, give us a checkup from the neck up. Um, and it's just a really cool positioning of that, and a quick real world takeaway. So
Yeah, great. Thanks. Well, why don't you read the third section for us here, Joshua 2:14 through 21. It's a little bit of a longer passage, so sit tight, folks.
here we go. Our lives for your lives, the men assured her. If you don't tell what we are doing, we will treat you kindly and faithfully when the Lord gives us the land. So she let them down by a rope through the window, for the house she lived in was part of the city wall. She said to them, go to the hills, so the pursuers will not find you. Hide yourselves there 3 days until they return, then go on your way. Now the men had said to her, this oath you made us swear will not be binding on us unless, when we enter the land, you have tied this scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down, and unless you have brought your father and mother, your brothers, and all your family into your house. If any of them go outside your house into the street, their blood will be on their own heads. We will not be responsible. As for those who are in the house with you, their blood will be on our head if a hand is laid on them. But if you tell what we are doing, we will be released from the oath you made us swear. Agreed, she replied. Let it be as you say. And so she sent them away, and they departed. And she tied the scarlet cord in the window.
Okay, so I feel like there's probably a million Easter eggs in this part that you read, and I'm gonna uncover just like two or three maybe here. And I love this passage because here they are, the spies of the mighty Israelites that are gonna come in and conquer land, and this lowly prostitute, but they are making a pact and they're making a covenant and they're talking about blood. I mean, this like just rings of covenant, and even that's kind of an Easter egg of sorts. But what I love about this is two things. There's this specific recall about her family, right? Unless you have brought your father and mother and your brothers, all of your family into your house, right? And if you remember in Noah, right? So Noah was commanded to bring his family into the ark, and if they weren't going to be saved. So and we have Rahab here, right? Rahab bringing her family in, and if not, they won't be saved when the flood of the Israelites comes in and undoes Jericho. So I think that's an interesting little Easter egg here, but
Hmm.
instead of it being God's people, again, it's these Jericho residents. It's these people that aren't Israelites that are given this kind of like Noatic. And then the other part that really astounds me about this is they're talking about the entrance where they have come in and gone out of this house having a scarlet rope hanging from it. And the last time that we had a wave of destruction come, except for an entrance that had red on it,
There it is. The blood
doorpost.
the post. There you go. Their words are
Mhm.
hard. And that was Exodus, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. That's
Yeah.
the Exodus, and that's the story that she was recalling, right? So the story that she was recalling now gets to become part of her story, which, gosh, that'll preach, right? Where the more we engage, I mean, this is why we do this podcast, right? The more we engage with the story, right? The story of God, the story of the Bible, the more it actually becomes our story, and the
Right.
promises of the story begin to live out in our life, and then hopefully we get to offer that story to other people's lives. And so I'm just amazed by that. Like this part gets me going every time because I'm like, I just want everyone to see this. Like you have to see this. You have to see this part that relates to Noah and see this part that relates to the Exodus. I think it's just amazing. And so the invitation here, among everything I just said, I do want to ask one specific question for you and I to discuss here. In the Shema, we talked about the priests and the people wearing the laws and the commandments on their forehead and on the tassels of the clothing, and I think on the wrists and their hands and stuff. And here, Rahab and her house are to bear this scarlet rope and to bear the story of God. And so Kyle, for us, I'm kind of combining last episode with this episode. What is our clothing as Christian? Like what are
Mm.
we supposed to bear as we resemble God's acts of salvation, right? Like his act of
Mhm.
salvation in our life. Like we don't go around wearing I think they're called phylacteries, these little like boxes on our forehead and on our wrists and on our clothing. We don't walk around, I don't think so. We don't walk around with painting our doorways red with blood or with ropes. So what do you think how would you answer that question? What would we wear today as Christians to reveal the salvation that is ours in God?
Yeah, it's interesting because you look at certainly a lot of conservative groups around the world that choose to pick a specific style of dress that is perhaps more shows to the rest of the world, hey, we're choosing to live differently. Um, I think that for me, it's a nice reminder not only of what I, dress in to go out in public, but also the armor that I put on in the spiritual realm, which I think we've got into in some of our other episodes, but certainly looking at this world where principalities exist of good and of evil. And so, part of my preparing for the day is to put on what we call the full armor of God, the shoes of peace, the belt of truth, the breastplate of righteousness, the shield of faith, the helmet of salvation, and the sword of the Spirit. So there's an interesting preparation, regardless of what the physical clothing looks like. That is another interesting element to how we dress, how we present, and it's a unique combination of how we prepare to meet the physical world and how we prepare to meet the world beyond that.
And that is awesome. I love how ready you were with the armor of God, and that's Ephesians 6 for those of you following along in Scripture. That's awesome. I do not have the armor of God nearly as memorized as you do, but I do have some similar passages prepared because there's 5 other instances that come up right away in Bible Gateway on a search about clothing yourself. And I truly believe, and it's Paul in 4 of these and Peter in one of them. I think he's thinking along the same lines as the question we're asking here about the Israelites had these certain clothing rituals that they did, and Rahab, bore this scarlet robe. I think they are thinking with the same imagination that we are in this episode. And so I'm gonna rapid fire read these verses for you, but listen to how the authors of the New Testament answer the question we are asking. Romans 13:14 says, rather, clothe yourselves with the Lord Jesus Christ and do not think about how to gratify the desires of the flesh. Galatians 3:27 says, for all of you who were baptized into Christ have clothed yourselves with Christ. Colossians 3:12, therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. And then 1 Peter 5:5 says, in the same way, you who are younger, submit yourselves to your elders. All of you clothe yourselves with humility toward one another.
Mm.
God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble. And so there's a whole bunch, like there's some big picture ones, like clothe yourselves with Christ. But then we get some of the clothing of patience and humility, and gentleness and kindness. And so, yeah, we wear a clothing that can be specific. You and I live in Amish country, so we see certain believers of the Lord, our brothers and sisters of in Amish territory that dress a very distinct way that
Mm-hmm.
makes their faith known. And yet the New Testament in an even higher degree points towards these attributes, these fruit of the Spirit being the clothing that we ought to wear.
Yeah.
Anything else on your end, Kyle?
Oh, that's good.
All right, let's do the last section and then we'll close it out. So, yeah, the last three verses there, verses 22 to 24.
All right. When they left, they went into the hills and stayed there 3 days until the pursuers had searched all along the road and returned without finding them. Then the two men started back. They went down out of the hills, forded the river, and came to Joshua, son of Nun, and told him everything that had happened to them. They said to Joshua, "The Lord has surely given the whole land into our hands. All the people are melting in fear because of us."
Yeah, great. So, verse 22, basically, I think it's giving us the assurance that Rahab didn't rat them out, right? So they went to the hills, they were safe there, they were delivered there, and Rahab held her end of the word. She didn't like alert the guards, like, "Hey, this is exactly where I told them to go," right? So they were saved, they were delivered, and then when the two spies get back to Israel, they say everything that happened to them and pronounce that surely the Lord is with us and the whole land is into our hands. And what I love about this is now what Rahab has spoken to the two spies, the spies are speaking to the people. And in that sense, Rahab is a prophetess. She's a prophet at this point. She is giving sort of the promises of God, the character of God to these spies, and the spies are giving it to the people. In that sense, Rahab is, and it's why we titled the episode what we did. Rahab's redemption is not only her redemption, but it's the redemption that's coming through her as well to God's people of saying, yes, what you have heard is true. And she was willing to lay her life down for it to come about and to survive it. And so even like she is being redeemed and her family's being redeemed, but the message she gave to the spies is also helping to bring about redemption in God's people. So
Yeah.
the fact that, I hope that even that is a little bit of craftiness in the episode's title for you all listening to the end here, where it's like, oh, it's not just her redemption, it's redemption through her. And so our final invitation for you and I to discuss, Kyle, is, Rahab again, the least likely character that we would ever think to be a hero at the beginning of this book is a prostitute from Jericho.
Sure.
What are, who or what are we invited to listen to be assured of God's love for us where we least expect it? Do you have any of those moments in your life or in that noggin of yours?
Yeah, I don't think anything concrete other than the sense that one of the things I've painfully grown to do over the years that has served me really well is to learn from others who I disagree with and to take nuggets of wisdom from individuals that do not share the same worldview that I do. I very much want to say, no, put you in this box, ship you out. No. But it's much more nuanced than that. I can firmly reject someone's worldview while also saying, you know what, this is interesting. Yep, that actually rings true. How does this fit into my life? And I also think, without getting too far down the rabbit hole, you can go back to past episodes, but we talk about being an image bearer, and these other folks that may not have come to Christ yet, they are still an image bearer. And so there is that goodness there. So it's a unique perspective. And I think, again, one that, I'm always challenged to do is, instead of judging, let the Lord do the judging, stop, pause, and give some grace and reflect. And oftentimes you can get some good little nuggets of wisdom there.
Yeah, and man, this is not an isolated theme in the Old Testament. And I guess I won't do any spoilers. So we will be revisiting this theme again in future books for sure. And it's not a theme we often preach about for some reason. I know the reasons most likely, but for me, I think I actually told someone this earlier today. I'm not a sucker for clickbait unless it's about science. I love science. I just think like I love space stuff. I love subatomic stuff. So I love the big and the grand, the infinite.
Yeah.
I also love the quantum and the quarks and the protons and the string
Yeah.
theory. I was geeking out about string theory all the way back 20 years ago as an undergraduate to my friends, and they were like, "Why are you geeking out about this so much?" I was like, "I don't know." But what I've learned is in the same way that you have trained yourself to pay attention to people that you disagree with or might disagree with to hear like, gosh, maybe God is speaking through them. Man, there's something about like the James Webb Space Telescope and the images that it's producing and the science that's producing about just how grand and grandiose and beautiful the universe is that tells me something about God. There's something about quantum physics where you can take electrons that have bonded together in a meaningful way and separate them by miles and miles and miles and miles. And if you reverse the spin of one, the other one reverses instantaneously and reveal something about the connection that we have with God, even though we can't measure the distance between us and God.
Yeah.
There's this instantaneous connection that we have. And one of my favorites, there's a podcast called Radio Lab, and it's not Christian. It's done by a public radio, and they have this episode called Goo, 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 and it's a short episode. It's only like 20 minutes long, but it covers the fact that scientists have been studying the cocoons that caterpillars go into before they turn into butterflies to study how do caterpillars turn into butterflies. And the answer is we don't know because it's just goo in there.
That's so
There's no
cool.
legs. There's nothing in there. It's literally just goo. We don't know. And doesn't that just speak to the mystery of our hearts being changed by God, right?
Yeah.
We don't know. We don't know what that power is. We can't bottle that up and sell that or market that. It's just God. It's just goo. And so, that's one for me is I just pay attention to science and I pay attention to God's nudging on some of those clickbaity
Sure.
things too, where I'm like, why do I feel such an urge to read? Whatever, I'm gonna read it, and it's almost every single time that I read a science article that I'm like, there's something here telling the story of God, or that's encouraging to me right where I am in my faith.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's good.
So with that, I'm gonna summarize some invitations, and Kyle, if you have any others, great. If not, we'll do our benediction. But hopefully, here in studying Rahab's redemption here, we are to act on our beliefs, right? And without fear. And there's a contrast there, right? Rahab says the whole city is melting in fear. But Rahab not only knows the story, she believes the story and acts on it. Another one is we are to be people that wear our hearts on our sleeves, right? And by that, as Christians, we are to wear Christ. We are to wear humility and the armor of God and kindness and patience. And so, sure, if you want to dress Amish or you want to dress in Christian branded clothing, that's fine. But the ultimate call is to bear and to wear Christ likeness. And then lastly, we're to keep our eyes and ears open to the unusual ways that God will remind us and assure us of his love. Anything you want to add to the invitations before our benediction today?
I think the last one is the one that really, really speaks to me. And again, just what a reminder. We can't judge a book by its cover. And the second you write someone off, they can have a huge impact on a much larger narrative. And I think if we're paying attention to that, it brings us back to God and what he's done in our own lives to get us back on track. And that's always a beautiful thing.
Yeah, and it definitely resonates with humility, right? So when you're remaining humble before God, you'll remain humble before voices you might not expect to hear God from,
Right.
and vice versa. Say what you will about Rahab's vocation, but she was humble. She was humble in the sense of like, I'm gonna trust the story. I'm gonna sacrifice my own life for these spies and for my family. It's hard to get more humble than that. And so, again, I think that's why God honors Rahab in this story and all the way flash forward to the New Testament and the first chapter of Matthew. We can't dig into the story of Jesus without first seeing Rahab. I think really important. And I think we should hone our own eyes and ears to something similar going on in our life of where can I perceive God where I might least expect it. And so with that, today's benediction is, may you act on the assurance of God's deliverance in ways that show off the clothing of God's redemption of you.
Thanks for listening to the Invitation Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, kindly invite others, see what I did there, Kyle, to listen in by sharing it with a friend, posting about it on social media, or even leaving a rating and a review.
To catch all the latest and greatest, give us a follow on Instagram, Facebook, or X at The Invitation Pod, and help us share the invitation with others. Thanks again. We hope you'll tune in to future episodes.